Emma blinked, caught off guard. But you always seem so comfortable. People admire you, hang on your words. You own the room. Richard let out a soft chuckle, a sound that held no arrogance, only quiet truth. Owning the room doesn't mean belonging in it. People see what they want to see. They don't notice what's underneath. The words lingered, wrapping around her. She felt something stir deep inside, a recognition. A reflection of the way she herself often felt invisible, misplaced even in her own marriage. I suppose I understand that, Emma murmured, almost to herself. Richard glanced at her then, just briefly, but his gaze was steady enough to make her chest tighten. I thought you might. The ride continued in waves of silence and conversation, each moment carrying a weight that neither of them acknowledged aloud. They talked about safe things first, music, the kind that played softly on the radio. Books Emma admitted she hadn't had much time to read lately. The places in the city that had changed since she was a child. Richard listened, not just politely, but intently, as though every word she spoke mattered. Emma realized, with a jolt, how rare that felt. Daniel used to listen that way. Once. Before the long hours, the business deals, the endless dinners that kept them apart, even when they sat side by side. You used to play piano, didn't you? Richard asked suddenly, catching her off guard. Blinked. How did you know that? A small smile curved his lips. Daniel mentioned it once. Years ago. Said his wife used to fill the house with music. Emma's breath caught. It had been so long since she'd touched the keys, so long since anyone had remembered. Daniel himself hadn't brought it up in years. I stopped playing, she admitted. Quietly, life got busy. Then one day it just felt like no one was listening. Richard's hands tightened briefly on the wheel, his jaw shifting as though he wanted to say something but held back. Finally, he murmured, That's a shame. I can imagine it beautifully. Her cheeks warmed at the words, though they were simple, beautiful. It had been a long time since anyone had described her that way, not just her appearance, but something she did, something that was hers alone. The car slowed as they reached her neighborhood, the familiar streets pulling her back into reality. But reality felt different now, charged with everything unsaid between them. As Richard pulled to a stop in front of her house, the porch light glowed softly in the night. The sight of it should have comforted her. It was home after all, but instead, it made her heart ache with something she couldn't quite name. Richard didn't unlock the doors right away. Instead, he turned slightly toward her, his expression careful, almost searching. Emma. His voice was lower now, softer, carrying something fragile beneath the surface. There's something I probably shouldn't say, but tonight, for some reason, I can't seem to stop myself. Her breath caught. The night seemed to hold still around them, every sound from outside fading into silence. She met his gaze, steady and intense, and felt a flutter deep in her chest, a mixture of fear, longing, and something far more dangerous. What is it? She whispered. Richard leaned just slightly closer, not enough to cross the line, but enough that his presence wrapped around her. Undeniable. His eyes held hers, unflinching, as though he was peeling away layers no one else had ever seen. And in that moment, Emma knew that whatever he was about to say, it would change something inside her forever. The car rolled to a gentle stop in front of Emma's house, the faint glow of the porch light spilling across the driveway. For most people, this would have been the natural ending to an evening. A polite thank you, a quick goodbye, and the sound of tires fading down the quiet street. But the silence inside Richard's car felt different. It wasn't an ending act. Or, it was a pause, heavy, charged, waiting to be broken. Emma sat with her hands folded in her lap, her heartbeat echoing far louder than the soft hum of the engine. She could see her house through the windshield, familiar and steady, yet it suddenly looked distant. Home was only a few steps away, and yet she couldn't bring herself to open the door. Richard hadn't moved either. One hand rested on the steering wheel, the other loosely at his side. His profile was calm, but there was something in the way his jaw tensed, in the way his gaze lingered not on the road, but on her. Finally, he turned, his voice low but steady. "Emma?" Her breath caught. She wasn't sure why hearing her name from his lips felt so different. Softer, somehow. More deliberate. "Yes?" She whispered. He hesitated, as though weighing his words carefully. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "There's something I probably shouldn't say. But if I don't, I'll regret it." Emma froze, her mind racing. What could he mean? Her husband's boss. This powerful, self-assured man looking at her with such intensity. The moment stretched, long enough for her to feel the warmth of the air between them. Finally, Richard spoke again, his voice carrying both restraint and longing. "You deserve more than being someone's afterthought. I see the way Daniel overlooks you, and I can't help but wonder if he realizes what he has. Because I do." Emma's heart felt as though it had stumbled into freefall. His words struck a place in her chest she hadn't let herself acknowledge for years. She wanted to dismiss it, to push it away, to say it wasn't true, but deep down, she knew it was. Daniel had once adored her. In the early years of their marriage, his eyes lit up whenever she walked into a room. He had left her little notes, reached for her hand without thinking, kissed her forehead in passing just because he wanted to. But over time, those gestures had faded. Work had filled his mind, ambition had claimed his heart, and Emma had learned to accept scraps of his attention as enough. Now, here was Richard seeing her, not just noticing her presence, but seeing the ache she carried quietly, the ache she never dared put into words. Her throat tightened. She turned to the window, afraid her face would betray too much. "You don't know me well enough to say that." Richard's voice softened, but it carried conviction. "I've watched, I've noticed. You sit through dinners like tonight with such grace, even when you're left alone. You smile when no one bothers to ask you how you're doing. You stay, you support. That says more than you realize." His words were gentle, yet they pressed against wounds Emma thought she had hidden well. She blinked rapidly, willing her eyes not to blur with tears. "Richard," she began, her voice trembling. It's not fair to say these things. You're my husband's boss." "I know." His tone was quiet, regretful. "And that's exactly why I shouldn't. That sometimes silence feels like a greater betrayal than speaking the truth." Emma turned to face him fully now, torn between anger, shock, and an aching gratitude she couldn't explain. Her chest rose and fell as she struggled for words. "Why tell me this? Why now?" Richard met her gaze steadily. "Because tonight, watching you walk out of that dinner, I realized something. You deserve to hear it at least once, that you are worth being noticed, worth being cherished." Her breath shook as silence followed his confession. She wanted to run, to escape the weight of what he had just placed in her hands. But another part of her, the part that longed to be seen, kept her rooted in her. Her house loomed in front of her, but it felt like another world. Inside, Daniel was absent even when present, caught up in the pursuit of his career. Inside, she would once again slip into bed beside a man who rarely looked at her the way Richard was looking at her now. And yet, Richard was not hers to want. Emma swallowed hard. "You shouldn't say these things to me. You'll only make me doubt everything." A faint smile tugged at Richard's lips, though it was filled with sadness. Maybe doubting is what reminds us we're alive. Her chest tightened painfully. She couldn't allow this. She couldn't let his words unravel her carefully built world. And yet, her heart was already betraying her with every uneven beat. "Richard," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, don't." He exhaled slowly, leaning back just slightly, as though pulling himself away from the temptation of saying more. "You're right. I shouldn't have said anything. But I couldn't. Drive away tonight and pretend I hadn't noticed." His restraint, his careful line between confession and respect, only made the moment more unbearable. He wasn't trying to win her. He wasn't asking for anything. He had simply given her words she didn't know she had been starving for. For a long while, neither of them moved. The night outside was quiet, the faint sound of crickets filling the air, the glow from the porch light painting soft shadows across Emma's face. Finally, Richard shifted, his hand brushing the keys in the mall. "Ignition. Good night, Emma. Take care of yourself." Her lips parted, as though to speak, but no words came. She could only nod, her heart caught in a storm she hadn't prepared for. He gave her one last look, a look that was both goodbye and something unspoken, something she would carry long after he left. Then, with quiet control, he started the car and pulled away from the curb, his taillights disappearing into the night. Emma stood frozen on the walkway, staring after him long after the street had gone silent. The cool night wrapped around her, but inside, she burned with questions she couldn't silence. Why did his words feel truer than anything she had heard in years? Why did she ache with both guilt and longing? And why, despite everything she knew she should feel, did part of her wish he hadn't left at all? That night, as Emma slipped into her quiet house, her heart refused to settle. Daniel wasn't home yet. The silence greeted her like. Emma had never been the type of woman who enjoyed large gatherings. She didn't hate them, not exactly, but they left her feeling as though she were dressed in clothes that didn't belong to her, walking in shoes a little too tight. Company, dinners especially, brought that feeling out the strongest. They were full of laughter that seemed rehearsed, smiles that looked perfect under soft lights but didn't always reach people's eyes, and conversations where every word carried an unspoken weight of competition. Still, she went. She always went for Daniel. Daniel, her husband of 8 years, had a steady job at a successful firm downtown. He worked long hours, the kind of hours that often kept him at the office late into the night. But Emma never complained. She had learned early in their marriage that success came with sacrifices. And if she wanted to support him, she had to accept that his time wasn't always his own. That night, she stood in front of their bedroom mirror, smoothing down the soft navy dress she had chosen carefully. It wasn't too flashy. Emma never wanted to stand out, but it was elegant, something that flattered her figure without being daring. She tucked a loose strand of her chestnut brown hair behind her ear and took a breath. "Ready?" Daniel called from the hallway, already adjusting his tie. She forced a smile as she stepped out. "As ready as I'll ever be." He gave her a quick glance, and though she had secretly hoped for a compliment, all he said was, "Good. We don't want to be late." Emma nodded, slipping on her coat as he grabbed his keys. She told herself not to mind, not to dwell on the silence where a simple, "You look beautiful," could have been. It wasn't that Daniel didn't love her, she knew he did. But sometimes his love felt like a well-worn sweater. Reliable, familiar, comforting, yet lacking the spark it once had. The restaurant was one of those downtown places Emma had only ever seen in magazines. Warm lighting, tall glass windows, and tables dressed in white linen. A long line of expensive cars was parked outside. men in dark suits stepping out with women draped in glittering dresses. Emma clutched her small handbag tighter, feeling, as always, slightly out of place. Inside, the air buzzed with energy. Waiters floated between tables carrying silver trays, and laughter spilled across the room like champagne. At the center was the long table reserved for the firm Daniel's co-workers, their spouses, and at the head, the man Emma had only met a handful of times but could never quite forget. Richard Harley. Richard was Daniel's boss, the senior partner of the firm. He was older than Daniel by at least 15 years, with streaks of silver in his dark hair that only made him look more distinguished. His presence was magnetic. Even as people chatted and glasses clinked, Emma noticed how conversations hushed just slightly when he spoke, as though his words carried a weight no one else's could. Daniel, of course, was eager to sit near him. But the arrangement of the table placed Emma further away, sandwiched between two other wives she barely knew. Daniel quickly became engaged in a lively discussion with clients on the opposite end, leaving Emma to sip quietly at her wine, nodding politely as the women beside her gossiped about vacations and shopping. She tried to listen, tried to join in, but the truth was she didn't belong in their glittering world. Their words felt shallow, their laughter forced. Emma wondered, not for the first time, if Daniel ever realized how invisible she felt at these gatherings. As her gaze wandered down the table, she found Richard's eyes on her. It startled her at first. He wasn't speaking, though others were, trying to draw him into their conversation. Instead, his attention lingered on her, steady but not invasive, warm but unreadable. When he caught her looking, he gave a small, polite smile, one that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. She looked away quickly, her cheeks warming, that for the rest of the evening, she felt the weight of his presence. Dinner stretched on, courses appearing and disappearing in a blur of candlelight and conversation. Emma barely touched her food. Daniel was too busy talking business to notice, and she found herself withdrawing more and more into silence. She thought of the early days of her marriage, when Daniel would lean close during dinners like this and whisper jokes in her ear, too. Make her laugh. Back then, she had felt like his partner, his equal, his chosen person in every room. Now, she felt like an accessory, someone to fill the seat beside him, smile at the right moments, and then fade into the background. As dessert was served, she excused herself to step outside for air. The night was cooler than she expected. City alive with lights and sounds that felt far more genuine than the polished conversations inside. She wrapped her arms around herself and tilted her head back toward the stars, though the city lights made them faint. Too loud in there? The voice startled her. She turned to find Richard standing a few feet away, holding a glass of water instead of the wine most others had been drinking. Emma straightened. Oh, I didn't realize anyone else had stepped out. He gave a soft smile. Crowds have a way of draining me too. People assume I love them, but he shrugged lightly. Sometimes I just need quiet. Emma hesitated, unsure how to respond. This was her husband's boss, after all. But there was something in his tone, something unguarded, that made her nod. Yes, I know the feeling. They stood in silence for a moment, the cool air filling the space between them. Richard's presence wasn't demanding, wasn't heavy, like it was inside the restaurant. Out here, he seemed more human. Before Emma could say more, the door swung open and Daniel's voice carried out, calling her back inside. She gave Richard a quick nod and hurried away, her heart strangely unsettled. By the time the dinner ended, the group had grown livelier with drinks and laughter. Daniel, flushed from wine and excitement, decided to stay behind with a few colleagues for another round. Why don't you take a cab home? He said casually, barely glancing at her. I'll be late. Emma forced a smile, though a dull ache pressed against her chest. Of course. She slipped outside into the night, pulling her coat tighter around her. The street was busy, but no taxis seemed to be free. She debated whether to wait or call a ride when she heard a familiar voice. Emma. She turned. Richard stood a few steps away, his expression calm but purposeful. It's late. Let me give you a ride home. It's safer than waiting here. Her breath caught. A ride home? With him? She hesitated, torn between politeness and the fluttering in her chest. Accepting his offer would blur lines. She wasn't sure she wanted to cross, but refusing felt strangely impossible. And as she looked into his steady gaze, she realized this night was only just beginning. The city air was sharp and cool, brushing against Emma's skin as she stood on the sidewalk waiting for a cab. Her coat wasn't quite warm enough, and she tugged it tighter, feeling both exposed and strangely forgotten. The laughter from the restaurant spilled onto the street behind her, voices that sounded distant, like a party she was no longer invited to. She glanced up and down the road. Taxi lights flashed in the distance, but none slowed. She wondered how long she would have to wait, how long she would stand here under the cold glow of the street lamps, while her husband drank another round with colleagues, barely noticing her absence. Emma. Her name cut through the night. She turned, startled, and there he was, Richard Harley. The way he said her name was different. Not hurried, not careless. It carried weight, as though he were speaking directly to her, and not just filling the silence. It's late, he said, stepping closer, his coat collar turned up against the wind. You shouldn't wait out here alone. Let me take you home. Emma's lips parted, but no sound came out. She hadn't expected him, not here, not now. Oh, that's kind of you, she managed at last. But I don't want to trouble you. His gaze softened. It's no trouble at all. Besides, he gestured to the street, where another empty taxi sped past without slowing. You might be waiting a long time. The practical part of her knew he was right. Yet something deeper twisted inside her chest, a whisper of uncertainty. Accepting a ride from her husband's boss felt like crossing some invisible line, one she couldn't quite see but could feel pulsing beneath her feet. But then Richard opened the passenger door of his car, sleek, dark, elegant, and gave her a look that was steady, reassuring. Not demanding, not insistent, just certain. Emma hesitated only a second longer before nodding faintly and slipping inside. The leather seats were warm, the faint scent of cedarwood and something expensive wrapping around her like an embrace. She exhaled, realizing only then how cold she had been outside. Richard settled behind the wheel, his movements calm, unhurried. The engine hummed to life, and soon they pulled away from the restaurant, leaving the noise and laughter behind. For a moment, silence filled the car. Not uncomfortable silence, something heavier, charged, like the pause between heartbeats. Emma stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and silver. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't voice. Why was her chest tight? Why did the simple act of sitting beside this man feel different than it should? It was Richard who broke the quiet. You don't enjoy these dinners, do you? His voice was low, almost thoughtful, as though he wasn't asking a question but making an observation. Emma's head turned sharply. What makes you say that? A faint smile tugged at his lips, though his eyes remained on the road. Because I don't either. And it's easy to recognize the look on someone else's face,